Well, you know, there were a lot of trials and tribulations on my way to realizing my dream of becoming a physician. You know, my parents got divorced early on. My mother got married when she was 13. She was one of 24 children. And they moved from rural Tennessee to Detroit. And, my father was a factory worker, and she discovered years later that he was a bigamist, and she only had a third-grade education herself. And, we ended up moving to Boston to live with her older sister and brother-in-law. Typical tenement, all the things you would associate with a tenement. Rats, roaches, murders, sirens, Both of my older cousins were killed. Dire poverty. And I must say, as a kid, the thing I really hated was poverty. Some people don't mind it. But I really did. I hated poverty. And I thought maybe I'd been born in the wrong family or something, but I just couldn't stand it. But, my mother was out working extremely hard, 2-3 jobs at a time, leaving at 5 in the morning, getting back after midnight, making every attempt to stay off of public assistance. Occasionally she accepted some aid, but for the most part she was successful. And the reason was because she was very observant. Even though she only had a third-grade education, she noticed that no one she saw go on welfare ever came off of it. And she just didn't want to be dependent. She refused to be a victim. And she never made excuses for herself. And she never felt sorry for herself. And that was a good thing. The problem was she never felt sorry for us either. So, there was never an excuse that she found acceptable. And she always said, "Do you have a brain?" If the answer was yes, then you could have thought your way out of it. And in the long run, I think that was the most important thing she did for myself and my brother. Not accept excuses. And I think that led to both of our success. My brother became a rocket scientist. And it makes a difference. And it's something that we really need to teach our kids. Because we have a lot of people in our society, some of them at very high positions, who never take responsibility for anything. It's always somebody else's fault. George Bush or somebody, it's always their fault. And when you can wallow in an excuse, you don't have to do anything. And you can become very complacent by blaming other people. Well, other thing about my mother is she just knew how to stretch a dollar. And she would go to the Goodwill, buy a pair of trousers that had a big hole in the knee. That was back before that was fashionable. And, buy a couple of patches and put it on there. People would say, "Where'd you get those pants? I want some like that." And we would go out to the country on a Sunday morning. She'd knock on a farmer's door. Say, "Can we pick 4 bushels of your corn or your beans or your apples? 3 for you and 1 for us." Well, they always liked that deal. And then she'd bring the stuff home and can it. I mean, she was so thrifty, could stretch a dollar so far. I am positive that if she were Secretary of Treasury, we would not be in a deficit situation. But her dream was to be able to move back to Detroit, and after a couple of years we were able to do that. Still in a horrible section of Detroit, but I was a 5th grade student, and I was a horrible student, probably the worst student you've ever seen in your life. I thought I was really dumb. My classmates thought I was really dumb. I remember we were having an argument on the playground about who was the dumbest kid in the school. And it wasn't a big argument, because they all agreed it was me. But then someone tried to extend the argument to who was the dumbest person in the world. And I said, "Wait a minute, there are billions of people in the world." And they said, "Yep, and you're the dumbest one." So unfortunately that day we had a math quiz. And you had to pass your paper to the person behind you. They would correct it, give it back. Teacher would call your name out loud, and you have to report your score out loud, which is great if you got 100 or 95. Not so great if, like I did, you got a 0 and just had an argument about who was the dumbest person in the world. And I knew when I said 0, they were all going to laugh hysterically and say, "See, we told you." So I started scheming. I said, "I know what I'm going to do. When the teacher calls my name, I'll mumble. And the girl behind me will think I said something, and the teacher will think I said something else. So when she called my name, I said, 9. And she said, 9? Benjamin, you got 9 right? Oh, it's wonderful. I knew you could do it if you just applied yourself. Class, do you understand the significance of this? Benjamin has gotten 9 right. I had 30 questions. And she just kept ranting and raving. Finally, the girl behind me couldn't take it any longer. And she stood up and said, he said, none. The kids were just rolling in the aisles. I mean, they were beside themselves. And if I could have disappeared into thin air, never to be heard from again in the history of the world, I would gladly have done so. But I couldn't. So I had to sit there and act like it didn't bother me. But it did. It bothered me a lot. Not enough to make me study, but it bothered me a lot. Well, you know, my mother understood why it was important. And, you know, she noticed in the homes that she worked in that they didn't watch a lot of TV and that they did a lot of reading. And she prayed and she asked God to give her the wisdom to know what to do to get her sons to understand the importance of intellectual development. And you know, the wonderful thing about God, you don't have to have a PhD to talk to him. All you have to do is have faith. And she believed that he would give her the wisdom. And he did. At least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was wise at all. I mean, turning off the TV, what kind of wisdom is that? And making us read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Libraries every week and submitting to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. And she put little check marks and highlights and underlines, and I was outraged. Everybody else was outside having a good time. I was stuck in the house reading books. I said, this is craziness. And her friends would say, you can't make boys stay in the house reading books. They'll grow up and they'll hate you. And I would overhear them and I would say, Mother, you know they're right. But it didn't matter. You know, we had to do it. But I'll tell you what was really interesting. As I started reading those books, and particularly I started knowing stuff that nobody else knew. In the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, much to the consternation of all those students who were calling me dummy. Now they were coming to me saying, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I'd say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was perhaps a little obnoxious, but the other thing is, as I was reading about people of accomplishment, and I read book after book after book, I began to notice something. I began to notice that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. It's not somebody else. It's not the environment. And I began to forsake all of those people around me who were saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, the system's against you, those people are against you. I didn't have time for that. I was too busy learning, gathering what I needed to make me successful and valuable in life, and developing the can-do attitude, because it's the can-do attitude that made America great. No one needs to do anything for you except make sure that you have an equal chance to use the gifts and the intellect that God has given you. That's what the can-do attitude is all about. We're replacing it with the what can you do for me attitude, which is a sure guarantee of decline of any system that has it. And we need to get rid of it and bring back the thing that made this into a great nation. It's not too late, and I think we all play a part in doing that. But, you know,